Recently, we have received an unprecedented amount of lore details straight from the leaders of the development team behind Tears of the Kingdom. And, well, the only thing I can say to this is, the developers aren't always right. Today we'll explore why that is, what is wrong with the ideas proposed by Mr. Fujibayashi, and how big game studios even function. Because when you think about it, it's pretty insane. So subscribe, you can support via Patreon or memberships, yada yada yada, let's get into it. Is the intent of the author more important than someone's personal interpretation of the work? This is a question each one of us must answer to ourselves. Mind you, neither answer is wrong, the matter is entirely subjective after all. Though, if you did say yes, you are about to get very upset with me. I am a firm believer that a work of art, a book, movie or a game, should only be judged based on what is contained within it. Any external information, be it an interview with game developers or tweets of a well-known writer, is entirely irrelevant. The moment a work is published, that's it. That's when the author declares it complete and gives up the right to dictate its meaning. Between art critics, this concept has been dubbed the death of the author. When viewed in this light, the lore claims made by Zelda developers in the recent wave of interviews take on a completely different shape. To me, the tidbits we were given aren't canonical fact. They are not gospel. In fact, they are exactly as valuable as any fan theory or interpretation published on YouTube or on Reddit. No more and no less. Therefore, they should be examined like any fan work would. Here's how we do that. For this exercise, I'm going to focus on the most repeated claim made in an interview. You know the one. The explanation for the absence of TotK in Tears of the Kingdom, presented to us by Mr. Fujibayashi. To start with, we need to determine the premises of his explanation. They are as follows. There is continuity between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. TotK vanished at some point. The disappearance was classified as just one of the many mysterious events in Hyrule. All of the characters shrugged and moved on. Fairly straightforward. Alrighty then. Now, we need to determine what we are dealing with. Is this pointing out a fact of the setting, an interpretation, or a theory? To determine that, we need to ask a few questions. First, are these premises directly stated anywhere in the game? No, nothing. Not even a single line of dialogue. Alrighty then. In that case, we are not dealing with a statement of fact. Next question. Are these premises alluded to in an indirect manner? If so, that would make them subject to interpretation. Alas, that is also a no. Then we're firmly in the theory territory. Now that we know what we are dealing with, let us examine the evidence. That way we can figure out if we are dealing with a more grounded type of a theory or a heavy speculation. So, are these premises hinted at through dialogue and/or objects found within the game? Well, we don't have any dialogue, but we do have some remaining fragments of the TotK, which immediately invalidates the absolutist tone of the interview quote, but let's push on. We know from the previous game that the TotK can indeed teleport, though to do that a destination is required. Mr. Fujibayashi gave us nothing about his idea of such a destination. And that's about it. That's all the game has in support of this theory. But weak theories can still be good if they work well with the setting. So does this? No, it doesn't. This idea is both absurd and unfounded. But you know what? Shredding it to pieces sounds like a fun activity. Let's have some fun. For a moment, please put yourself in the shoes of a Hylian. All your life, you kept hearing about terrifying, massive mechanical beasts prowling the plains of what used to be Hyrule Kingdom. If you traveled, you have likely encountered their dead husks. Then, one day, you hear that thanks to the actions of a courageous hero, all of the death machines were disabled. Hooray! Being this Hylian, what would your reaction be if one day all of those inactive death robots just vanished? would you really be willing to just shrug and say that it's probably not a big deal? No, you wouldn't. Your entire village would be sent into a panic. People would be asking all sorts of questions, demanding answers from whoever is in charge, and preparing for the second coming of the apocalypse. And what about the researchers? Generations of Sheikah who spent their entire lives studying the technology of their ancestors. Would these people who invested so much time into understanding this technology and who also know it better than anyone else, refrain from asking any questions whatsoever, and then just move on to studying a culture barely anyone has ever heard about? Wouldn't they try to figure out what happened and why? Wouldn't they worry that maybe, somehow, Calamity has returned and took over the robots yet again? Wouldn't they try to mass-produce and improve on ancient weaponry just to have a chance at combating the Guardian army? It is absurd to assume people would just be fine with death machines vanishing when they weren't looking just because mysterious events happen in Hyrule, and I repeat it as if it were true. The matter of fact is, mysterious events are not a common occurrence in this version of Hyrule. Not at all. As far as fantasy settings go, Brev's Hyrule is a very grounded one. The land is inhabited by mysterious spirits, but they don't go around doing things willy-nilly. They have their domains and largely stay there. The weirdest thing that can happen to an average person in regards to them is a sighting. Even Koroks, often described as mischievous, don't interact with Hylians, or any other races for that matter. It's the same with magic. Hyrule has a bunch of different variations of magic, most of them aren't understood too well, but generally speaking, they aren't some weird arcane spells. Most of the magic seen in Hyrule is very simple. It works in a specific way, giving the wielder one specific power. It is decidedly not the kind of a magic system where anything can happen and nobody really knows the extent of what spells can do. Nothing in this setting suggests that a sudden disappearance of an entire chunk of history should be seen as not that special of an event. That's not even theoretical. That actually is a fact of the setting. Back in Brev, when Sheikah Towers suddenly awoke and rose up from the ground, there were many NPCs all around the map commenting on it. It wasn't just another one in a long line of weird events. People noticed. If these same towers were to vanish, people would notice too. That's all before we even get into the mechanics of how something like this would even happen. For the Sheikah tech to vanish because it isn't needed anymore, it would have to all be connected to some sort of a central, housing either a person or an AI. In either case, that entity would need to have access to the power of clairvoyance in order to decide when to call back the tech. Then every single piece of Sheikah tech ever made would need to have the capability to teleport, and it would need to be able to do so even if badly damaged, like the Guardians. Finally, the entity deciding on the callback would have to have either a device or a place to store all the towers, all shrines, every guardian, and every divine beast. Where would such a thing be located? Who has a Sheikah slate with Vanna Boris? And, assuming the callback happened, why did some parts of the Sheikah tech not get teleported? Did the device malfunction, teleporting the entire body of a shrine except for its elevator shaft? Really? We also need to ask ourselves about the consequences of such a callback. Some of these shrines were really big, you guys. There was an entire divine beast underneath the plateau. If these were just mysteriously teleported away, wouldn't it create a giant cavity in the ground? Wouldn't you expect that to collapse onto itself after all the supports were suddenly removed? This is not a good lore explanation. I often hear, they should have just put in a line of dialogue and then it would all be fine, but that's not true. This idea isn't just weak, it quite literally breaks the logic of the setting if applied. It isn't even well presented. See, when I make my content, I try to hold myself to a standard borrowed from logicians and the debate community. It is called the burden of proof. What it means is that if I dare to make a claim, any claim, it is on me to provide you, my recipients, with information to back it up. In essence, it's pointing out that Zonai ruins in Faron share iconography with the Zonite set before saying, hey, both of these are probably from a similar time period. That way, you as the recipient are informed on where I'm coming from, and if you find yourself in disagreement, you can provide a good counter-argument. It's healthy. It helps bolster the understanding of the subject of everyone involved. On the same note, the absence of contradictory information is not a good substitute for proof. It is a bare minimum to even start the discussion. A logician will tell you that you cannot prove the negative. Or simpler, you can't prove a claim to be untrue. The only thing we can do is debate claims' accuracy, find contradictions, and maybe conclude the evidence to be insufficient. This is also healthy for discussion. Of course, we aren't talking about a YouTube lore video. This is a short interview response. I wouldn't expect Mr. Fujibayashi to give us a full essay, that'd be ridiculous. However, he still should have backed up his idea with something, even if it was just a single additional sentence. That way, at least we'd know where he was coming from. Instead, we're here, filling in the blanks and grasping at straws, being told to just deal with it. Cool. With all that said, I find it very likely that many people within our community genuinely know Zelda's lore far better than the actual developers do. But before I explain to you why that is, I'd like to read you a quote from the most recent interview. Eiji Aonuma says, "This is the first scene in the Zelda series where Ganondorf kills someone, which surprised me. However, after all, the enemy should be a bad guy, otherwise you wouldn't be able to think, this is the guy. Up until now, I've been gently portraying Ganondorf as a bad guy, but I think that, in that world, this story wouldn't have worked if he wasn't portrayed as such a villain. I've been drawing him for a long time, but I feel that Ganondorf has been firmly established as a character in this work."
They have no idea what they are talking about, do they?
Look, I get it. He done goofed. Happens to everyone. He's a busy guy. No hate intended. All I'm saying is, a statement like this does not inspire confidence. If these two struggle to recall major plot events centered around their most recognizable villain, how can we trust them on nitty-gritty details? But there's still more to this. Death of the author aside, whenever developers speak out about their game, we like to think about their studio as this monolithic entity. We all know that many people work to create Zelda games, of course, but by simply calling them all devs, we remove the nuance and create this black box of sorts that just magically spits out a new game every few years. I'd like to try and bring back some of that nuance, just so you can understand what we are dealing with. And here, a disclaimer, I am not a game developer. However, I got in contact with someone who is. Anonymous Lady Dev agreed to talk with me and give me some valuable insights into the industry. The following is based on the information gleaned from this conversation. So, the very first thing that is very important to realize is that both Aonuma and Fujibayashi are very, very high on their studio's ladder. They are a producer and a director respectively. While the range of responsibilities of any given position will vary studio to studio, generally speaking, a producer will usually fulfill the role of a project manager. It is a person who deals with logistics of creating the game, deadlines, scheduling, meetings, and so on. On the other hand, the director will, direct the game. That means broadly leading the creative direction and making sure the game feels consistent to play. The director can be more involved than this. Their engagement in the details of production can and does vary from person to person. To quote Lady Dev,
"Usually, directors or stakeholders or funders will broadly tell you what they want. You make it, and you bounce it back to them for approval or edits. But sometimes you have a director that's more creatively hands-on. Like I've worked at a studio where the director insisted on doing all the writing, including flavor text. And no one got a crack or really get hung up on the idea that they want to see. Like, oh, I love this quest. Now make the quest giver the murderer. I want more murderers in this game." Since games are inherently collaborative, how they're made can really vary depending on personalities and leadership and how they best like to run things.
Lady Dev didn't work with the Zelda team, so we don't know for sure what kind of a director Mr. Fujibayashi is. This isn't even an editor intermission, this has been edited already and uploaded for members, so sorry for sounding different suddenly. I've recorded this entire script while being raspy after a cold, and now I no longer am. Anywho, it has been brought to my attention, thanks Zelda lore, that Mr. Fujibayashi has been on the record for writing as well as directing multiple Zelda games before. You can see it all displayed nicely in this Wikipedia table. This would indicate that yes, he does care about the writing of these games, and yes, it is likely that he has had a deeper involvement with the writing of Tears of the Kingdom's story, even though he wasn't considered a writer on this one. No one was, for that matter. More on that later. Past me wanted to now talk about Nintendo's famous gameplay-first approach to design, so let us continue.
Oh, the inconsistency is object and space placement? Like I said, I haven't worked at Nintendo, but I'd bet money that there was conversation like, hey, this building used to be here. Should we put it back? Does that serve the level design and new mechanics that were introduced? Not really. Then nix the building. Nintendo is very much known for their gameplay-first design. Everything else comes in a distant second to that for them. If they felt like keeping the landscape consistent wouldn't serve the gameplay for their new game, there wouldn't be a hesitation on changing it.
Tears is a very large game, and Nintendo is a very large studio. Studios like that tend to have rigid structures and divide people working on a game into smaller, more manageable teams. Each of those teams will specialize in a specific portion of the game. Because of this, some amount of documentation is necessary to coordinate dialogue writing and world-building details. However, the extent and nature of such documentation can vary. Specifically for Nintendo, the brand consistency is by far more important than consistency between the new game and the previous ones. As in terms of studio priorities, we don't actually know what their internal documentation looks like.
Japanese game companies have a reputation in industry of having very top-down, tightly controlled hierarchies with little creative freedom for foot soldiers. It's likely that Nintendo has a metric ton of documentation for design and narrative standards, like Link is always the hero, Zelda is always a princess that is trapped by Ganon, Ganon is always the villain, Link must save Zelda, Link can never do anything explicitly villainous, with examples including but not limited to ... That
isn't to say Nintendo doesn't keep the documentation on previous games. They clearly do. It is just that adhering to that documentation most likely isn't seen as a priority.
If there isn't narrative consistency, it's probably because the director made it clear that he didn't care about the narrative and didn't want people to get distracted writing cohesive narratives when they could be refining the level and quest progression.
I've had this whole thing about the credits and changes in them between Breath and Tears, but with the information from Zelda lore, now I feel this section has been misinformed. So to just get straight to the meat of the matter, there's been no writers listed in the credits for Tears of the Kingdom. Before, in Breath, there was a script supervisor along with 2 writers listed. Those were Akihito Toda and Naoki Mori. In Tears, both of them are instead listed within the game design team. As far as I understood from my conversation with Lady Dev, it is entirely within the realm of possibility for game designers to also work on writing. We don't know if that is what happened here or not, but that's true of pretty much everything in this section, so what's new? Zelda lore was also able to learn that sections of Tears, specifically listed as scenario design, were outsourced to Quonia Writers Inc. Quonia has apparently written a wide range of things, from mobile game scenarios to things like Tales of Berseria visual novel wide. At least according to Nairo, I haven't verified that myself. So yeah, I'm not going anywhere with this, since the original point I made here is moot, and I don't quite know how to incorporate this information into an already edited video set to release this week. But I figured that this is interesting and you might want to know. It is not my intention to bash the developers who created these amazing games for us to enjoy and obsess over. They did a phenomenal job in creating this Hyrule, even if they don't quite see eye to eye with the community in terms of priorities. That said, what is intended by the developers and what is actually achieved can be two completely different things. Due to the nature of game development and the priorities of Nintendo as a game studio, it is easy for inconsistencies to occur between games. Zelda lore community is uniquely qualified to smooth out those inconsistencies. We are a large group of people, many of whom made it their literal job to obsessively overanalyze dialogue and models down to textures, spanning across not just the two most recent and very large games, but the series as a whole. Leaving it to player imagination has always been the right call. Once again, I'd like to thank Anonymous Lady Dev for sharing industry knowledge with me. This would not have been possible without her help. Surprise thank you is also in order for Zelda lore for all the corrections in the second half of the video. Also, huge thank you to my draconic sages, Jardint, Von Bob, Fiona, Giga Chickney, and Merburb. If you'd like to join their ranks, you can support me on Patreon or via YouTube membership. Also, because this video had large portions of the script cut or changed, I will be sharing the original draft with all patrons and members as a bonus perk. Check it out if you are interested. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening, and good night.